Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com, part of the Paramount Podcast Network. I am Mike Casaza here today to talk about West Virginia football, the Big 12, the NFL draft, how it is and is not all connected. Welcoming in Chris Anderson to shed some light on the subject here. Long live the streak, Chris. 15 straight years West Virginia has a player drafted into the NFL. The streak comes to an end this past week, which I don't know if we're numb to or not. So let's just stop and appreciate this for a second here. No player drafted first time since 2007, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's a heck of a run. And there's so many players who get picked 7 rounds, 3 days now that you just think, yeah, you're going to get one. Didn't get one here. We probably suspected this was coming, and it doesn't really sting or even resonate too much because I think we all kind of assumed this was certainly on the table. But when it doesn't happen and you realize it's happened in succession for so long, it really is quite an achievement when you look at the amount of really good teams and quality seasons that filled those 15 years. It does make a lot of sense. And you look at these past 3 years, which have been more thin than robust, it also makes sense. But just take a second here and acknowledge a 15-year run of draft picks at West Virginia.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. There was a time there where I went back, and this was a couple years ago, and West Virginia was one of only like a dozen teams that had an active streak that was where West Virginia was at, which I think was 12 or 13 at the time. And I'm looking at some numbers right now trying to figure that out. I mean, it's still up there. I think, obviously ended at 15, as you noted. And a side note, 15 in a row and 19 of the last 20. Again, very solid. And select company. I mean, when you are doing something that only 10 to 15 teams in the entire country are doing, especially, when you always consider the blue bloods and the 5-star recruits and all that stuff, and West Virginia doesn't recruit those 5-star recruits, because the other part of that story I did, and I'll pull it up and I'll put it on our message board by the time you listen to this podcast, was that of the teams that were on that streak of straight draft picks, West Virginia was either lowest or second lowest on average recruit rankings coming out of high school. Wisconsin, I remember, was right there with them. I can't remember. So Wisconsin and Oregon State and West Virginia were the 3 lowest. And so that's also something that's indicative, I would think, of a team being able to develop talent and to showcase talent, or at least find diamonds in the rough. So that was another recruitable tidbit, or tidbit that they would use on recruiting trails for players. So the fact that the streak ends, yeah, whatever. But it kind of stings, because that's a nice little thing to have in your pocket of, hey, 15 straight years, still going strong, and not anymore. Not anymore.
Let me ask you a question, and I've written about this before, and I even brought it up on Sunday morning in my 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely understand the need to have recruiting ammunition and to have the social media graphic at the ready and all that. I'm not numb to that. I'm not dumb. But where is the line? Where's the finish line? The separation point between college and the NFL when it comes to a head coach or a program or even a conference's standing, in that I don't necessarily think that, for example, MAC football programs, head coaches exist for the same reason that the SEC does. SEC wants to win championships, national championships, and then that means collecting almost like a minor league feeder program to the NFL on a campus in one of those southern states. The MAC's different. They're not gunning for that. They're trying to educate kids and give them a college experience and all that stuff. And, I understand it's college football and it's at different levels, but I just feel weird treating the Akron coach like the Alabama coach and measuring how many players the Akron coach sends to the NFL or how many players the MAC sends to the NFL versus the SEC. Now, granted, that's Power 5, Group of 5. That's totally different ends of the spectrum. But even within the Power 5, you have, for example, Alabama, West Virginia, Georgia, Kansas State. You have those disparities where I'm just not sure those programs and those coaches exist for the same reason. You want to win more than you lose. You want to compete for conference championships and get into that CFP discussion if you're in the Power 5. I get that. But localize it here Neil Brown's taken some arrows because of player development and how good his program hasn't been, and maybe it's because of developing or recruiting or retaining talent. And then there's an inevitable blurring and blending there. I get that, but I also just don't know that Neil Brown's job is to send players to the NFL. It helps. It makes the ultimate job of winning games easier, but just wonder how big of a metric that is, and then how deep that extends into the Big 12. And it's such a broad, bumbling question by me, but do you necessarily think this is that? It's that black and white. It's that indicative of a coach or a program success that you have to have players go to the NFL if you're going to be good at this?
Absolutely not. I think
Okay.
you go back and because so much of it, again, the college coaches, their role is to win. Their objective is to win. They don't care how they get there. They have different systems. I'm going to dip back into the Rich Rod days. I mean, those teams were wildly successful, and a lot of those top players, I'm thinking specifically on like the offensive and defensive lines, just the schemes that they ran and the way they did things. Those guys didn't get NFL looks really. I mean, West Virginia had a 4-year starter, consensus All-American Remington Trophy winner at center. Barely got a sniff in the NFL. Didn't get drafted. I'm talking about Mike Compton. Didn't get drafted and had to kind of fight through that. And I think was on a practice squad for a year or two, and that was it.
Mm.
His career was over. And is that a negative on Compton? Is that a negative on West Virginia's program? No. He's a 4 years. He was a multi-year starter, all consensus All-American, best center in the land, and doesn't get drafted. Obviously, there are things that are different about what the NFL is looking for than simply college success. So there are times like that, and you roll through West Virginia's, players that have been drafted, and yeah, you see obviously some very good players: Tavon, Geno, Bruce Irvin, Nick Kwiatkowski, and so on, and just keep rolling through there. But go through, and I'm talking like the late 2000s era, where it was transitioning from Rich Rodriguez to Bill Stewart. Selvish Capers. Now, it's a late 7th-round pick, but when you ask me to think of a lineman from that late 2000s, early 2010s era, like Selvish Capers might be like the 10th one I think of, 12th one I think of, but he had the body, the long arms, and the talent or the upside that NFL scouts were looking for. And he was the only lineman, let me pull to make sure this is right, to get drafted by West Virginia from 2004 through until what? Cajuste?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, till 2019. So again, it's a systems thing, it's a scheme thing, and sometimes that just it might go with winning, it correlates with winning, but it might not jive with what NFL teams are looking for.
It's a nuanced conversation. I've written this before too, and it's not to keep harping on it, but if you look at the states that represent the Big 12, there is not a lot of high school football. Um, Chris, do you think there's more high school football in Oklahoma or in Iowa?
Let's say Iowa.
It is Iowa. That's
Yes.
surprising. There's more high school football in just Texas than there are in the other Big 12 states, and everybody's in Texas. And if you're Kansas, Iowa, Oklahoma, West Virginia, schools in those states drawing, it's really difficult. And then you can get good college players, that happens, but look at the footprint of the ACC and the SEC. Like the best high school football states are there, and they're going to Texas now, and the Pac-12 is trying to get into Texas now. Everybody's in Texas, and like these southern and southeastern states and the West Coast states where it's warmer all the time, they always do better when it comes to NFL talent, just because they have better high school recruits. It's just harder in the Big 12. When you look at what happened this year, 25 players in the Big 12, nobody from the Texas Longhorns. It's incredible. But that's what you said, the second time in 4 years that's happened.
Yeah, some of the 2nd and 4 or 2nd and 5, something like that, where they have had 0 players drafted.
It's just a strange thing sometimes. And I'll say this, that can't happen in Texas. The resources, the luxuries, pedigree, the tradition, you have to do that. And then I think that is part of the job there. I think at Texas, you are expected to recruit NFL quality players because you are in Texas and you have that prestige. I'm just not sure that it's the same in all the other Big 12 programs or even nationally too. Um,
One quick correction. Sorry. I just went before. I
Hmm?
don't know how many Longhorns listeners we have, but 8 years, I believe. So it was 2014, they had zero. And then in 16 and 17, they had one apiece.
Hmm.
So twice
Um,
in 8 years. Still unacceptable for a team like that.
this is not piling on, but this is observational here. Let me bounce some transfers off of you since Neil Brown's arrived.
Yep.
Um, can't count Kenny Robinson, but he did go to the portal. Got drafted. Derek Pitts, you think he would have been a player?
Yeah. I think as far as on-field production goes, like he was up there. He had NFL on-field production and talent.
Okay. Didn't quite turn out for him. Then you're looking at guys that don't really have a chance, but Giovanni Haskins. I think there was some buzz about him for a while. Martell Pettaway, who knows? Probably not. Josh Sills was an undrafted free agent.
Yep.
Have not seen Tyler Sumter anywhere, but he came in, he didn't go out. Trying to think of guys who left as well. That's pretty much that from that class. And then we go to last year. Well, the big one, obviously, Tyke Smith would have been draft eligible, correct?
Yep.
I think a lot of people think about that one. Darrell Middleton left, but he also arrived. That would have been a guy, maybe. Maybe he does something. Jeff Pooler would have been interesting. One more year in the scheme, could he have done it? It's not like Northwestern's a bad place for defense. Drayshawn Miller would have been interesting. If
Yeah, I
he's,
think
if,
that's one that had a real possibility.
yeah. And then that's pretty much it as far as guys who have left that could have been drafted, and maybe made something happen. So there's been some talent that's left, and I think that's a knock that a lot of people want to apply to Brown. Is it always his fault? I don't know. Again, you have to retain guys. I get that, but I think what's interesting is if you look ahead a couple of years, from players who left, what could happen, and we'll talk about like who's on West Virginia's roster that could get into the NFL now. But the players who have left, just don't know. Is Cowan going to be a guy? TJ Banks going to be a guy? Sam Brown is one I would probably watch. I've heard nothing but good things about him since relocating. Um, who else? Sean Ryan? Probably not. Jackie Matthews? I'd be surprised.
Akeem Messidor. That's
Probably
one.
the big one is where I was getting there too. Porter, I don't know. He'd have to do really, really well. He seems like a good college player, maybe not an NFL player, but my point being, it was going to be hard to break this streak because of the quality of the rosters, and you've seen that on the field. Let's look at the current roster now, Chris. Candidates for upcoming drafts next year or two. The obvious one is JT Daniels,
Mm-hmm.
who we reported is due on campus the third week of May. So he can get started at ASAP. He'll graduate like on a Saturday and be up here on a Monday. I think that's more or less the timeline, but um, that's good news for him and for everybody else. After that, guys who are juniors or above, I guess redshirt sophomores are above, but 3 years out of high school. Who do you think, I guess in order of arrival to the NFL draft, who do you think has a good look at this? And then maybe further down the road, who has a chance to have a chance?
I think Dante Stills is number 2 on the list here. Maybe number 1, depending on how you think Daniels will progress this season or how quickly he'll pick things up. Because, I mean, honestly, Mike, here's my talk radio hot take. I
Mm.
think we blame Dante Stills for ending the streak, coming back for his 6th year or his 5th year. Could have been drafted this past season. Just
What if
saying.
he didn't come back last season? I might still be a zero this year, though, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But yeah, I think he's got everything you're looking for. You and I discussed this on this podcast 100 years ago that if he had come out the same year as Darius, his brother, even though Darius had the consensus All-American honors and everything else that came with it, that Dante likely still would have been drafted higher. Again, because the NFL values different things than simply college success. And Dante hadn't quite done what Darius had done at that point, but Dante had, as far as his physical attributes and his athletic ability, was a little bit higher than Darius, and I think he would have been drafted higher even 2 years ago. So I would certainly consider him a very real possibility to be drafted next spring.
From his class, and this is going to kind of encapsulate the issue here, or the discussion. You have Taj Alston, has the size, played very well last year, finally got his feet back beneath him, literally, and played well. If he does it again, that could be a guy who has some numbers and has a chance. Lynn J. Dixon is an interesting one because he's kind of had a sputtering career, but for a while was a very explosive player, just 5'10", 188, running back. That's tough. See, from that class, that's about it. That fifth-year senior class. You have a redshirt senior class of James Gamitter. Got a chance to come back next season too. Also has 2 children and he's married. Perhaps he wants to go pro. We'll see. Charles Woods, cornerback. I think people would be not surprised if he has at least people in the building, if he has an all-conference caliber season and is mentioned. And then also from that redshirt senior class, Sam James, very productive once, in between. But I love what he did in the spring. I think there's a chance there, but you're talking 6'1", 175. We'll see. Now you get a little bit further down the road, Chris. This is where it becomes a matter of retention and development. Their redshirt junior class, can't give you a name that clicks, prospects, but we'll see. Their junior class is exclusively composed of Zach Frazier. Redshirt juniors, you have a Lance Dixon, who's kind of athletic, could do some things. Bryce Ford Wheaton's a big guy at receiver, but hasn't been terribly productive. Further down, redshirt sophomores, guys who I guess if they got crazy, they could get drafted out of this season.
Oh,
Sean
you
Martin.
skipped one.
Oh,
Doug Nestor.
Got a chance to come back. We'll see.
Redshirt, yeah, we're listed as a redshirt junior, at least on the WVU football website. So
okay. And then from there, they just don't know a lot about anybody who's younger than they have a chance right now. So they're a young team that's going to have to use some young players. But like you're talking redshirt sophomores of like the Jordan White, Torres Simmons, Linnell Carr ilk, which maybe in time, but not right now. And listen, this could be a really good team this year relative to what it's been the past 3 years. If the quarterback lifts the play, then hey, they might, I don't know if analytics dude is correct and they're going to get a 10-win season like they told the Daniels family allegedly, but a lot of things have to come from their young class of redshirt sophomores, redshirt juniors, whatever. Do you see, I don't know, a couple of people that if we're graying in a couple of years from now, we're talking about, hey, the streak is back at 2 years in a row because these players from, I don't know, that underclass group of the roster, they did something and they got themselves drafted.
Well, are we going all the way down to true sophomores?
What do you think?
Because that's 2 of my favorites as far as the young guys go, and that's Wyatt Milam and Caden Prather. It's guys that are already making an impact as true freshmen last year that have all the physical and athletic attributes that any coach at any level would just salivate over. So those 2 guys, if they continue on their current path, and again, as you mentioned, retain and develop, they continue on that current path at West Virginia, will be NFL draft picks. If I'm going that young, I'm going all the way down to sophomores. Now we got to have somebody in between there that can get that. But again, if you're asking me to pick one from each class, like, next year, Dante Stills, year after that, you could look at like somebody like Doug Nestor in that redshirt junior class, Bryce Ford Wheaton, similar spot. Then you get into redshirt sophomores. That's an interesting one because you're right. You mentioned the Jordan White, the Torres Simmons, Linnell Carr. Is it Sean Martin?
Same thing. They just, ton of potential, and it's going to have to happen on the field. And if it does, great. But that's kind of like where they're at, I think, in the stage of their program. They're in this embryonic stage where it's time for some of these guys to bust out of the egg and start to do some things, which could be fun to watch too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking of Martin again, like you said, just pure potential. You look at some of those guys in that sophomore class, and yeah, you see some talent. A couple of those guys have been on the field, but if you talk to an NFL scout and you say, "Hey, I got a 6'5", 280-pound defensive end that can also play inside and a little outside, and he's as strong as an ox," you got their attention. Now, you got to be able to produce on the field and make it, happen. Between the sidelines, but he's got the head start, if you will, in that class.
Yeah, I'm not being bleak or dark here. I think there are prospects there, and I think that's what's encouraging or exciting or maybe potentially redeeming about this upcoming season. Is a lot of guys you may get to know for not only this season but next season too, that have a real chance to sprout. And again, they think they've recruited pretty well. Some of the rankings do support that. Development has to happen. And I don't know. I think if you look exclusively at the draft in the past couple of years, you say, well, they haven't developed wonderfully. They haven't kept guys in house too. Well, why not now, right? Can they do it? It's just a good time to do it because they've spent a lot of time putting their pieces in place and something procedural to get guys into a developmental stage where, that 2020 season was rough. And Jordan Leslie talked about this too. They have a handful of guys who were either first or second year players in 2020 that you almost had to like kind of press pause on their development. And then when 2021 came back, you almost had to reset a little bit and get them back to like square one where they develop. And it just seems like there's a lot of guys who are at the starting line right now ready to fire off and do something. And if a couple of them hit, they could have a good season. And yeah, maybe they get drafted as well there too. Speaking of drafts, Chris, you're at work on post spring two deeps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Offense today, I'm presuming defense is right around the corner, maybe tomorrow.
I am thinking about it. Yeah. A lot of our things, which I'm guessing you're about to mention, so I don't want to steal your spotlight here, but a lot of the things are tenuously scheduled, potentially on hold, simply because of the deadline that you wrote about over the weekend, the May 1st deadline. But for transfers, by the way, that is to get it in before May 1st in order to be eligible for this fall. However, schools have 2 business days to get that done. So the deadline was midnight Sunday night, which means technically word may not be out on all transfers until Tuesday night at midnight. So yes, tentatively defensive depth chart Tuesday, but we'll see.
Once we figure out who is and isn't on the roster, we'll come back. You'll have your depth chart for two deep. And then we're going to draft our two deeps. We already went over this, but I'll get pick 1 or 2. You'll get pick 1 or 2, and we'll snake draft and we'll try to put together the roster. And we'll see, like, again, what type of talent they have, what type of depth they have. And then maybe from there, what needs they still have or suddenly have based on transfers departing, transfer portal possibilities. Still have 4 scholarships left to use. So plenty coming on the website. Check it out. What an April, Chris. Here's to May.
It was one of the busiest Aprils ever, one of the busiest months ever, not even just April's as far as the site's concerned. I think it was the second biggest month in the site's history, which when you think about the cyclical calendar that we face in this business, for that to happen in April is just absurd, absolutely absurd. And again, I'm looking at it right now, trying to confirm. Yeah, second busiest month ever, with the only other month being busier as far as page views are concerned. Would you like to take a guess, Mike?
Was it January 19?
January 2019.
Yep.
Yeah. Dana Holgerson out, Neil Brown in, coaching staff, all of that news. And this past month was second only to that. So very busy month, very big month for the site. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks everybody for supporting. And hey, West Virginia is giving us plenty to talk about, and we'll continue to cover it.
Tough act to follow, but thank goodness for the CFL draft coming up. Alonzo Adai, Deshaun Stevenson, those guys, if they don't have professional football opportunities outside the CFL, their rights are retained by the Red Blacks, correct?
Yep.
They can just go north of the border and play there, and they were drafted highly last year. I think Stevenson was before Adai.
They were the first and second round picks. I can't remember which order, but they were the first 2 picks for the Red Blacks.
Yep. So they have a home if nothing works out here. And then quickly recap here: Letty Brown, Chargers; Sean Mahone, Jaguars.
Yep.
I like Letty Brown and the Chargers. I kind of like what the Chargers do with their running backs, and who knows who makes it as a UFA, but they throw the ball a lot to their backs. Receiver good. Between the tackle guy, move the pile, move the chains. We'll see. He'll get some action there and practice squad at worst, I would guess, and they're just gonna let him go home. But can he make the roster? I don't know. Mahone, just solid guy, good for a locker room. He's gonna go in and practice hard and play hard, and maybe he makes that team. They have a lot of needs on defense. Could fit there too. Anything else stand out to you there as far as transactional stuff?
Not on the NFL front. I think the Letty Brown one. I like that Chargers offense. My only concern with it was they drafted 2 running backs, already had 3 under contract. So they have 5 running backs that are 20. I think Eckler's the oldest at like 27. That's a tough spot. None of those guys have guaranteed money really of any significance. So it's except for Eckler, and Eckler's not going anywhere anyway. But that is the offense that fits him. So he is truly rolling the dice on that he can beat out these other guys. Which, hey, if it's the offense that fits you and you feel confident in your abilities to beat out other guys and excel in that offense, more power to you.
Yeah, they took Spiller in the 4th round, correct?
Somewhere up there, 3rd or 4th, yeah.
Was there other guy a running back or a fullback?
Oh, was he a fullback? I don't know. They don't on the draft sheet, they didn't separate it out as fullback or running back. They just say running back. So
yeah, Xander Horvath, fullback, Purdue. I remember the name. I thought he was a fullback, but yeah, again, but they took a high pick. So I mean, again, 4th round guy for a running back is kind of high, but also undrafted is kind of high too, because that's just the way teams invest in it, especially when they have a guy like they have there at the clear number 1. They don't really need to fill with high round selection. So again, I think he'll go in and have a chance there. And if as long as he doesn't like fall down running a 40 or anything, and he does what he's supposed to do, they kind of know who he is and what he is, and I'm sure that they targeted him for a reason. So good fit for him. We'll see what happens then. So yeah, on to the CFL draft, on to the month of May, and then boy, June comes and gonna be busy. But let's not get that far ahead. See what we can't spin out of the news cycle this month. We'll be back. Future episodes of this podcast, more riveting than this one, I promise. Until then, I'm Mike Casaza.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We'll talk to you later.